John. It's a Friday now, and we welcome you all to the podcast. It's yours truly, Bob McCown, and John Shannon, with multiple fireplaces burning in behind him.
It's a lot cheaper than the logs, I'll tell you that.
Really, what do you pay for the cable or the satellite that gets you those?
You pay?
Okay.
You pay for that stuff?
Never mind.
Seriously?
Should have known better. A little bit of a bunch of stuff, but football off the top. Our good friends Mike Harrington of the Buffalo News and Billy Jaffe of NESN join us to chat a bit. And how intriguing it is that two of the sad sack Eastern teams in the National Football League have suddenly risen to some level of prominence. And we speak, of course, of the Buffalo Bills and the Cleveland Browns, who have combined. Harrington, have you ever done the math on this? Over the last, let's say, 20 years, would these be the two worst combined teams in all of the NFL? They might be.
Boy, they might be. Certainly, they're the most playoff bereft of the teams in the NFL. They have not made too many appearances. But, yeah, here we are. The Bills are one win away from clinching a division for the first time since 1995. And, as Billy probably notes, they've disposed of the New England Patriots after all these years.
Harrington's been waiting to say that.
Yeah, how about that? Who would have anticipated that?
Football doesn't even exist in New England anymore. I don't think that's the
but
sign
the Bills,
of the apocalypse.
The Bills now are a legitimate Super Bowl team in the wake of beating the Steelers. And the narrative really changed. If they had lost that game, they would have had a loss to Kansas City, a loss to Tennessee, a loss to Pittsburgh, and you would have said, maybe they're not ready for prime time. But that changed a lot. And really, to me, it's the Kansas City Chiefs and the Buffalo Bills 1-2 right now in the AFC. They have a legitimate shot at the Super Bowl. And it starts tomorrow, winning in Denver, clinching the division for the first time since 95.
Hold on. You're giving up on the Pittsburgh Steelers already, Mike?
I'm not giving up on them, but if you look at the schedule they've played, some of the games they've won have not been that impressive, and now they're in a bit of a slide here. They've lost 2 in a row, and the couple wins before that, they didn't play very well. They do not look like an elite team right now, despite what their record says.
We have spent years talking incessantly about the New England Patriots, and it's actually nice not to have them in the as an overwhelming part of any football conversation that you have. But let me take 1 second here to address one question, and that is this. And more to you, Jaffe, than anybody else, I suppose, because of your place of residency. If Brady is the consensus that if Brady had gone back to New England, that this team would be more or less what we have come to expect it to be. Is that the fundamental difference, or are there a whole bunch of things?
I think that's, if you go by the media and the average fan, I mean, yes, that's the consensus. Now, would they be dominant? Probably not. I think we all started to see, and I'm just a casual observer. I love it, but I don't get into the X's and O's of it. But you started seeing the Father Time. You started to see not just the Brady, but of some of the other guys too associated with him. And you still saw some of the magic of Belichick, and we can all joke about how curmudgeon he is and this, that, and everything. He's a phenomenal mind, and he gets the most out of his teams. But it isn't the same here. If Brady was back, it would be better, because the quarterback conundrum, I mean, that you should hear that. I mean, I don't know if you read the amount of people that want, put Stidham in, put him in. I mean, with Cam Newton, it's going off the tracks, at least in this casual man's observation.
Yeah.
Because they haven't had this. Now, they're not ready to completely burn down the franchise. But Bobby, it's coming, in the sense of change is coming big time.
Harrington, you've gone up against your team has gone up against the New England Patriots for a long time. Do you concur with that assessment? Well, let's say Brady and Gronk are back there, both of them. Does that change the picture?
It changes it some. They're better than they are, but they're certainly not anywhere near what they have been in the Super Bowl era, and Father Time does step in. Tom Brady isn't the same player. Gronk is not the same player. I think we've seen here in Buffalo, the issue most of the time over the years has been the quarterback, or the lack thereof, since Jim Kelly. The Bills finally found one, it appears, in Josh Allen, who's now an MVP candidate. It makes all the difference in the world. You got to have the quarterback. They haven't had it. New England's had it for 20 years. Now the worm is kind of turned, and we're seeing the impact of it. We're going to see how deep Josh Allen can take this thing. But, yeah, Cam Newton has not gotten the job done in New England at all. He's not what he was in Carolina, and that's a huge problem.
I'm not sure that he was good enough in Carolina either. When you look at his inconsistencies there,
Not in the last few years.
Right,
No.
right, yeah. The other
He got
thing
to a
is
Super Bowl, but he was overrated. He was an overrated guy.
But they also had a very good defense. Remember who coached that team? Ron Rivera coached that team, and they loved defense. And John Fox in front of him before him loved defense. The one thing I would say is, and Bob has always espoused that sports is better with dynasties. Sports is better with, whether they're villains or whether they're heroes. Teams that are always at the top. I wonder if Bob, if you've changed your thought about what New England should be, and how long we have to wait for them to come back before you start thinking they're another dynasty.
Well, this, in terms of dynasties, we used to refer to dynasties principally on the basis of how many championships they won, how many consecutive championships they won. In the case of the New England Patriots and maybe just the National Football League, it's so difficult to repeat.
But these guys were the evil empire, Bob.
Well, they are. Yeah, you're right. You're right. And I'm not a New England fan, but I'm a bigger fan of the National Football League because the New England Patriots have been great for an extended period of time. I want to know who's the blueprint that I want to follow. Whatever my team is, take a look at this team who has done it over and over and over again and see what the pieces are that they put together, and see if you can match that. When you have a different champion every year, I lose that flavor. I want success. I want dynasties, and it's contrary to what most people think. Jaffe, you're kind of nodding, but
no, I agree. No, I want dynasties too, because your point about aspiring to. I mean, I grew up hating the Yankees, hating them as a Red Sox fan. And by the way, I'm not from Boston originally. Family is. So that's how I had my affection towards Boston teams, because of my grandmother living here. And it's just coincidence now that I'm here. But I grew up hating the Yankees because, you know what? I knew every time they played the Red Sox, they were going to find a way when they were down 7 runs to come back and win. I knew it. I just knew it. And, and that's how the Patriots were for years and years. I agree with you about repeating in the NFL. It's virtually impossible. But yet you knew almost every time the Pats were in a game, in a playoff game, in the first few rounds, when they weren't great for the first 3 quarters, you just knew they were going to win. And you hated it. I mean, outsiders hated it because you knew they were going to win. So as a New England fan, it was great. On the other hand, and for the league, I think it was great too, because it gives everybody that one team to pile on against. But secretly, they're also yearning to be like. That's just the fact. And by the way, New England fans will be that way in a couple of years when they're no good. That's the way that they'll be again.
Well, hey, Mike, now with everything that you see, the stars aligning in Orchard Park, I mean, this Buffalo Bills team could be going in that direction. They're young. Sean McDermott's done an amazing job. They appear to be complete. Their defense seems to be okay at certain times of the day. They could be pointing to be the next evil empire in the AFC East.
Sure, and you're talking stability here. People say, how could Terry Pegula get the Bills so right and the Sabres so wrong? It's pretty simple. Coach and GM, coach and GM, coach and GM. He just extended Brandon Beane. They're both signed now through 2025. The Sabres have had, 6 coaches and 4 GMs since Terry Pegula took over. He's found the stability. He's found the right combination at the top of his organization in football, and that's a huge thing in this town. They've been able to have the proper leadership and the proper direction. They found the quarterback. They've traded for Stephon Diggs in the offseason. They've got a defense. And they're ready to go. They're ready potentially to win a Super Bowl and contend for a Super Bowl this year. The future is now.
Yeah, boy, I tell you what, you talked about Diggs. The Diggs acquisition just added that extra dimension to this offense, didn't it?
He needed a top number one wide receiver target. He didn't have it. Now Josh Allen has his number one guy who can be his 1,000-yard guy, who can get him the key catch at any time, that can make a play after the catch. And that's something they haven't had here in a long time, and that's something they needed. And, that was the missing link offensively for them. And to go out and get a guy like that and spend multiple draft picks to get an all-pro player, that's what you need to do sometimes to take your team over the top.
Yeah, all this is, look at you, if you're a Bills or a Browns fan, you relish the opportunity to have a decent team and a playoff team even once. Forget about next year, the year after, or anything that even approaches a discussion on dynasties. Having said that, it's so difficult to maintain any level of success in the National Football League. And you think back to the Patriots and what they were able to do, and what we constantly talk about were the little pieces that Belichick was able to put together almost on an annual basis, rotating 4 or 5 starting players that weren't there before, that came from somewhere else. And yeah, you lost the odd guy here, there, which you're going to. And success on a team level makes the players that you have more popular, more aspirable for other teams. And so they wind up getting overpaid to go elsewhere. So you're going to lose guys. You can't keep the core together. I mean, we sort of, we're not exactly all in the same age bracket, but there was a time, we all know, when in any sport, you got a group of great players, they never went anywhere. You could keep them. Money wasn't an issue. You didn't trade anybody unless you felt you had to. The dynasties of the Montreal Canadiens in hockey, the New York Yankees in baseball, the Boston Celtics in basketball, and the LA Lakers, and on and on and on and on.
No.
Those were explainable under the circumstances. We live in a different era now.
They were great.
Buffalo Bills
it was
of
great
the
for the
90s
fans.
go to 4 straight Super Bowls.
Bills of the 90s, and how many key players from that team, Mike, changed over those 4 years? None.
A few, but I mean the core. Look at the number of Hall of Famers. They were there for every year of the run.
Yeah.
The interesting. It was great for fans. It wasn't necessarily great for the players. And the pendulum has swung, whether it be all the way back to the 60s and 70s with Kurt Flood and then Catfish Hunter, and name a player in the other 2 professional major sports leagues in North America. But the pendulum swung to making sure that the players get the money and the fans don't identify with their dynasties as much.
You have to almost say about a guy like Belichick and the other management with the Patriots that one of their greatest qualities, people oftentimes, and I'm getting to what you were talking about, Bob, is that they talk about the tactics, right? The X's and O's and everything. How about it was the big set of cojones that they had to just let guys go, and just to say, thanks, we love you. Don't let the door hit you on the way out. I don't think they're that cruel, but we're not gonna. I think of Wes Welker years and years and years ago. Everybody thought, oh my God, here's this guy who came from nothing to become this. Wait a second. Well, okay, we'll bring in Julian Edelman. Who? Julian Edelman? I mean, the next thing you know, he takes over that role, but Belichick's ability, like Lou Lamoriello years and years, well, even now, but going back years ago, where he would say, you been here? You should stay here for this amount of money, but I understand why you're going to go somewhere else. We're not keeping you. That takes guts, because we see too many in the NHL, where I can really speak with, I think, a little bit more authority than the NFL. We see too many guys that, I call it, they fall in lust with their own players.
Yep.
Honest to God. I mean, you fall in lust with these guys. But you're right, Mike, but there's a plethora of guys. I will never forget this. And by the way, I'm a big Jacques Martin fan. Years and years and years ago, I'm down talking to Jacques. He had just signed Rostislav Olesh I think I was with the Islanders doing their games on TV. They'd signed Olesh to like and a few other guys, Stephen Weiss, et cetera, to like 12 or $20+ million contracts, like 3-year deals, 4-year deals, 20. And I said, oh, hey, what was your thought process behind this and that, blah, blah, blah. And his answer was to me as well, we love the players, and we really want players that want to be here. Who doesn't want to play hockey in Florida, making $20 million tax-free? And I mean, like, who doesn't? My point is you fall in lust with your own players too quickly because you're afraid that they're going to leave. Patriots were never afraid somebody was going to leave.
Billy, when you put Lou Lamoriello and Bill Belichick in the same sentence, I couldn't help but snicker because neither guy will tell you anything anyway.
Right.
I mean, that's and I mean, once you go inside the door, inside the room, Lou has rules, nothing gets out. Belichick has rules, nothing gets out, and you either fit in or you're not there.
And that's a managerial skill, knowing when to cut bait, because the popular view is never going to be to cut bait with a player at that particular time, because you're right. The fans love him. The team probably loves him. It's a skill to know when it's time, and the player himself often doesn't know when it's time. So the coach and the GM really have to make that decision for them, and guys like Lamoriello and Belichick have proven over time that they know what's best.
It's a different sport completely, but Kyle Lowry of the Toronto Raptors is 36 years old and has been the leader of this franchise since he got here and won a championship for the Raptors. And there was a poll question I saw on, I think, Twitter today. Should the Raptors deal Kyle Lowry at the trade deadline this year? And of course, in your heart, you say, no, the guy deserves to be here as long as he wants to be. You want him to retire in that uniform. But from a management standpoint, to speak to the point you guys are making, it's probably time. It's probably 36 years old,
Well, it depends where they are in the standings, Bob.
Of course it does. But even if they're on the fringe and don't feel they can have any shot of winning a championship, there will be a sentiment out there among the fan base of loyalty to this guy. And,
sure.
We went through the bring back Vince Carter stuff, and every team in every city goes through all that nonsense. Hardest thing to do is to say goodbye to somebody who's had success with you.
Now, we should be wise enough to mention that, NBA, Major League Baseball, NHL, guaranteed contracts. The National Football League, even though they do huge signing bonuses and guarantee cash, guaranteed contracts do not exist. And it changes the whole dynamic of in the door, out the door, when it works, when it doesn't work. I mean, it changes a lot for a lot of people.
That's I'm not arguing with that, and that's the common assessment. But Mike, do you think when you got a guy who signs, I'm hypothesizing, $100 million contract of which $60 million is guaranteed, how much does that change? How different is that than a $60 million guaranteed contract?
I think it's just all a question of timing. When it's time to get rid of a guy, and the Kyle Lowry situation is a perfect example. Are the Raptors going to be in it at the deadline? Is it going to be easier to maybe make that deal if they're playing in Tampa all year and you don't have to deal with the fans in Toronto is another factor.
Yep.
The money, the money plays into it in different ways, but it's funny how many times I have to remind hockey fans that they just say, let's cut this guy. Like, I say to people, this isn't the NFL. You just can't cut the guy. There's buyout rules if you want to buy him out at a certain time of the year. But, it all plays into it. It can get complicated. And again, it comes back to knowing when's the right time. And you're right. Now the Raptors are going to have a decision. When's the right time with a 36-year-old guy who's been with them a long time and won a championship?
Well, I watched the Raider game last night. And I'll tell you what, there are 3 guys in the Raiders that made 3 mistakes by the third quarter and thinking, I may be gone tomorrow.
You're right.
I may be done. Dan Bailey in Minnesota, the kicker, who's missed 7 field goals the last 2 weeks. You wonder, even though as a veteran, even though there's been a ton of loyalty, I mean, the National Football League dynamic changes 100% when you talk about non-guaranteed contracts. My goodness gracious.
Yeah, and especially when you're talking kickers.
Oh yeah.
Billy's actually, if there wasn't snow in his backyard, Billy'd be practicing to be a kicker because there's lots of kickers jobs available in the NFL right now.
Yes, I'm great from 12 yards out. Just get me to the 10-yard line or the 2-yard line, and
wow.
I'm great. You know, the question I have, historically asking nobody in particular, but in basketball, using Kyle Lowry, I mean, leadership has to play the same role, I would assume, as we talk about in the NHL. But how come we always hear about keeping older guys in the NHL due to their leadership qualities, but yet in basketball, I'm no basketball guy at all. Like, I don't read about it or anything, but it still has to have a valuable role. But are the players, is it not as important? Because in my eyes, it's more of an individual sport. Whereas like here in Boston, we're looking at the Zdeno Chara situation. Does he sign or not at 43 years old? Now, part of this has to do with Big Z's own decision of what's the league going to look like? What's the schedule going to be like? What do I want? The Bruins don't have a ton of money to sign him to. And does he want to go to a place that he feels would be better? But the comment that always comes back, his leadership. Yes, his skill set is changing. Yes, the game has gotten faster, but there are still maybe not 30 teams, but there are 25 other teams out there, gentlemen, that would take Zdeno Chara as a third pair defenseman in a millisecond, if not a second pair D-man, to play 20 to 22 minutes a night, shut down and penalty kill. And also his leadership, that is the number one quality. I don't seem to hear that as much in basketball, but again, maybe it's my ignorance to the sport.
GMs in the NBA are playing flat out bolder than they are in the NHL. The NHL is more conservative. They tend to keep guys longer. In the NBA, they will trade superstars like crazy. They'll do sign and trades on draft day. They'll do all sorts of massive movement that just doesn't happen in the NHL. And it's just the nature of hockey being much more a staid establishment kind of sport. The NBA, boy, they just throw guys around like crazy, and they're willing to do it. And I don't think they're discounting leadership. I just think they're willing to take more bold steps on behalf of their teams at times.
Well, I mean, even look at the way, you know, contracts are constructed and length of contracts. People are prepared in the NBA to go 2 to 3 years, whereas, you know, a veteran player in the NHL, he's going to want to sign a max deal. He's going to try to go, you know, 7 years as an unrestricted, and he's going to go 8 if he can get his own team.
But he makes the same amount in those 8 years as you do in the NBA for  2 year. That's, you know,
well, but that's it. But that's another economic story, Billy. That's another story for another day. Is where the money is, which is why the NBA is starting next Tuesday with its regular season. And they can ill afford to pass up more than $300 million of television revenue on Christmas Day alone.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, so, I mean, from that perspective, the economics change that whole concept. But I think Mike's right. The conservative nature of the game and of the players and of job security. And, you know, I want to stay here because I like the schools for my kids. You know, it's we don't want to change too much, and you know, whether it's that small town Canadianism or Americanism or whatever ism you want from whatever country you're from, it does happen in the game of hockey rather than basketball, who are saying, listen, I'm going to risk on myself. I'm going to play for 2 years. I'm going to have an opt-out, and I'm going to make $42 million 3 years from now.
I want to address real quickly a point that Jaffe made, and that's, well, you use the word leadership as it pertains to Chara, and you know, it's a fair evaluation. How much is this guy worth as a hockey player? How much is he worth as an influencer, a leader, if you will? And my perspective on that is pretty simple. Leadership is not a shared responsibility. It is generally a singular responsibility. It is assumed or given to an individual for the most part. And if one guy, like a Chara, happens to wind up going somewhere else, now you address who is the next most likely guy to step into that role. And it's usually one guy. And I will say this much, the Boston Bruins have plenty of veteran players of high quality, and you would know better than I, way better than I, but surely there's somebody else that would take over from Chara in the leadership role.
Oh, sure.
Someone who defers to him right now because of his age, his history, his performance over the years, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think in life, in business, and certainly in sports, leadership is about one guy, at least at a time.
You're saying that, Bob, but what I would disagree with, Rob, because in hockey, we've always worn the C on the sweater, which is a glorious, wonderful thing. Any kid at any level, from mini mites to NHL, when you see a letter on your sweater,
means something.
It's a feeling. It does. So I get what you're saying, how it's a one-person thing. However, where I'm going to disagree with you is the great teams understand that leadership becomes part of a collective group because of your comment, the last comment about how you think there is somebody. Patrice Bergeron is already the next captain of this team.
Well, there you go.
But he's part of it was actually, I was going to say a three. It's more like a five-some of guys that the leadership committee. It's so important for the Bruins to have multiple levels of leadership. So, yes, you've got the literally and figuratively big dog and Z, but Zdeno, you know this story. He never calls rookies rookies. He calls them first-year players as part of his mantra because he wants them to feel comfortable. So as part of that, he wants a leader, actually, of the first-year players. Meantime, you've got another level of players, Bergeron, Krejci, et cetera, who are captains, so to speak, of that group. So while I get what you're saying about the one guy in charge, the truth of the matter is, I think where I disagree, I think on the great teams of all sports, Bob, of all sports, they have multiple levels of confident leaders that are ready to assume responsibility for their, it's like a president and then multiple vice presidents, but those vice presidents are empowered by their president to run their division. It's no different than a well-run company.
Well, but there's
don't talk about presidents.
Well, fair enough.
January 22nd or whatever, we can start talking about that again.
But you know, I couldn't help but think about Jack Eichel when you talk about this, and talk about the pressure of. I mean, Zdeno Chara's in his 40s and he's a captain. Jack Eichel's in his early 20s, and expected to be that captain of a professional sports team. And is that fair to Jack Eichel? Really, is it fair?
And it's hard because Eichel and McDavid have both been thrust into that role, largely because of their draft status, largely because of their salary. And you think of the Boston Bruins, you know, Billy immediately comes out with Patrice Bergeron, and he'd be my choice. But then you think of, you know, Brad Marchand has leadership qualities. Torrey Krug certainly would have had leadership qualities had he stayed. There's a bunch of guys in that locker room, and the Buffalo Sabres have struggled to find that kind of leadership from Jack Eichel and others, and it's been one of their failing points. And that's why a team like the Boston Bruins succeeds over time. That's why the St. Louis Blues finally figured it out. That's why you saw what you did with the Pittsburgh Penguins. And like Bob said earlier, we don't see dynasties anymore. It's hard to repeat. The Pittsburgh Penguins won 2 in a row because they didn't just have Sidney Crosby as a leader in that locker room, even though he's an incredible leader. They had multiple guys. And when you do thrust it on one young guy, it's difficult. And that's a real difference between the Boston.
Well, my point really was that while there are multiple leaders on many teams, like the Boston Bruins, it is incumbent upon the majority of those leaders to defer to one guy. And whether he's the captain or not the captain, there is an understanding that when push comes to shove, when there's a discussion, when there's an argument, when there's a dispute, this guy's opinion means the most. And I think in the case of the Boston Bruins, if Chara was to leave, they are well positioned for somebody to inherit that role. And not all teams are. Some teams suffer dramatically if a player like a Chara left.
And by the way, not every veteran player can lead. I mean, that's the other thing of this, is that there's lots of guys that we look at and think, well, he's a veteran player, he's been around the league, he contributes. Some of them choose not to be leaders. Some of them say, I just want to play my game.
It's more pressure. Yeah. Let's see what happens. Now, let's see what happens. Mike brought up a great example of a team in St. Louis. let's see what happens now with no Pietrangelo, no Steen after he just had to retire due to injury as well.
That's right.
Now, what happened is Ryan O'Reilly, who is amazing. What a player the last couple of years. Sorry, I know he used to be in Buffalo, Mike, and now he's there. But
great trade.
Shanny's point, is he capable of being the captain there? I don't know. And I know that there are other great players. Torrey Krug, another good comment, Mike, is a phenomenal leader. It was always hilarious to see Zdeno, Big Z, and Torrey having meetings at the end of practice. It was Laurel and Hardy, which is an awful reference in 2020 because anybody watching a podcast probably says, who the hell is Laurel and Hardy? Anyway,
who did they play for?
Well, they were part of the Toronto Toros, I believe, years and years ago. But Torrey Krug's a phenomenal leader and one of the great guys in the game, but he's a first-year guy. So can he lead St. Louis? So I'm curious to see who takes over in St. Louis, to Bob's point. It's going, will that impact them? I don't know. I'm a huge Craig Berube fan. He gets it. He's a leader in his own way. So let's see how they take it.
Let's turn the conversation a little bit in the few minutes we have left here to the fact that we are sitting here a week before Christmas. And I know John will sit there, as he does every time we do a show, and say, oh, they're going to play. Oh, it's going to be January 15th. It's going to be January. It's going to be that.
No.
Well, here we are. Another day, another week has gone by, and what the hell's going on? Now we're talking about maybe we can't do a Canadian division. I don't know where they're going to play. I don't know how they're going to play. I don't know how long it's going to take. I don't know really what the argument is here. But the NBA just went, boom, let's go. The NFL went. Major League Baseball came to a decision, played a 60-game schedule, played a playoffs. Why are we where we are? Harrington, to you first.
The border. Baseball just said to the Blue Jays, go play somewhere else. They played in Buffalo. The NBA said to the Raptors, go play somewhere else. They went to Tampa. What are you going to do with 7 Canadian teams, especially now as the revelations come out that maybe the health ministers in these provinces don't want these teams traveling from province to province. So now are you really going to take 7 teams, displace them from their homes, away from their families for a whole season? I don't know if you could do that. And you still have the problem of the San Jose Sharks, whose county won't let any contact. So they've got to go practice in, where are we talking? Arizona, I guess. So those are, to me, really, really difficult issues for the NHL to solve. And I don't think January 13th is realistic at all. I think we're looking at early February now, but they have to figure out what is going on in Canada before they can really get this thing going.
Well,
Mike,
what exactly has changed over the past, how many months has it been since the Stanley Cup was awarded? I forget. Was it August? Was it
2.5 months?
Yeah.
2.5 months.
What has changed in 2.5 months? Well, things have gotten worse. But you couldn't predict they were going to get any better. Why weren't these decisions made months ago?
I think they thought they were fine. We're the NHL. We're going to have no problem keeping the teams in Canada, don't going across the border. The Blue Jays thought they were fine, and they were shocked they couldn't play their games, so they had to really scramble fast to end up in Buffalo. I think the NHL just was completely caught off guard that there would be any issue from provincial health people, from teams going through Canada, not coming across the border. That's become a real sudden stumbling block.
Well, the issue I think we all knew a long time ago, Mike, that there was going to be a problem with U.S. teams were not going to be allowed to come into Canada. So
everybody knew that.
Yeah.
Right.
So your resolution was going to be a Canadian division. Then you should have had plan B. If we can't travel within Canada, if those Canadian teams can't travel within Canada, then you got to put them in a bubble, or you put them in 2 bubbles and you move them in and out. Whatever the case is, you got to have plan B. And
I don't think they did.
Well, clearly they did.
I think they had plan B, but it had been put so far on a back burner because they had talked about at a certain point having what we've described as those mini bubbles. Because the first plan initially was to play for 2 weeks in a city, all 7 teams, play in the city for 2 weeks, go home for a week. And those cities were supposed to be Toronto, Montreal, and Edmonton.
Okay, John, if that's the case, why are they not playing now? What is
I
the
tell you what,
stumbling
because
block?
the stumbling block is our provincial governments and our federal government are
No,
really
if you
concerned.
have a backup plan, it doesn't matter
No,
what the provincial
Bob,
government says.
I got a backup plan, but you know what? I have to go to the public health service first. And I'll tell you what, the concern in every province for what's going on, and I'll tell you right now, you know, the National Hockey League and the other sports have been warned by the guys at the CDC and by Dr. Fauci that January 15th, the pandemic will be at its pinnacle. January 15th. And we were going to launch a season on January 13th. Come on. I mean, there are giant concerns. This is beyond sports. This is beyond sports. And I talked to 3 teams last night, and I just asked the simple question, doesn't this really demand a move towards February? You know, find a way to get a shorter schedule, 48, 42 games, and move it into February. I mean, the real big issue for hockey is they have to be finished by July 15th. They have to be finished by July 15th. So find a way to start the season later, and finish by July 15th. That's
Listen,
it. And I don't know why they can't.
Jaffe.
Well, Plan C, Bob. It's called cash. I don't know if they want to spend some of the cash that is also going to be, you know, in some of these other plans of bubbles, mini bursts, whatever you want to call them, mini bubbles, all that. Oh, I am convinced that there's nowhere near a consensus of owners that are saying, let's dip into our pockets again and do this as much. And I will contradict myself here, as much as they have to play. I'm not convinced that there's enough. Like, I think they have to. Despite, and don't get me wrong, this pandemic it's fully got my attention and everything, and I'm not being disrespectful to it, but I think they've got to figure out a way to play 48 games, to your point about figure out something, but I don't think that they have the complete yearning of complete ownership groups that want to do it, because whether it's San Jose, like Mike said, they might be completely, you want to talk not only spending money, but money on top of money, because living somewhere else in the U.S. I mean, it could be an exorbitant amount for these guys after what was it? They spent $100 million as a league for the bubbles, Canadian, the first time. And these guys, and look, we don't have the TV rights revenues yet, or maybe never, of the NBA. We don't have that. So the pressure, if we don't do, it's not as much. These guys won't make that money back like they will in the NBA.
You know, and there's nothing to say. There's also nothing to say that you know, you talk about Santa Clara County and the Sharks. There's nothing to say that the whole state of California doesn't go on a bigger lockdown. There's nothing to say that the state of New York, Andrew Cuomo has been threatening for the last 10 days, right, Mike, that he is going to put people on a bigger lockdown than they have. And so that means, where do the Sabres play? Well, maybe they have to move too. Where do the Islanders play? Where do the Rangers play? I mean, this is not that simple. It's not, and as much as we like to say it's a border thing, and now it's a border thing between the provinces, this is a public health issue that is not going to go away in the near future just because we have vaccines being delivered by FedEx and UPS yet. I mean, it's going to take a while.
And we're going to have a lot of hockey issues still. They haven't figured out. Out with a flat cap. What are we going to do? We're going to have taxi squad players. Okay, if we have COVID outbreaks, well, do those guys count against the cap? How do they count? You know, what do you do in the AHL? Do you have an AHL if your guys are under taxi squad? Do guys have to go through waivers? There's all these questions and all these things they have to figure out, aside from the fact we're in the middle of a pandemic that they haven't figured out, and they don't seem that close to figuring out. And, you know, we're talking January 13th. We don't have a schedule. We don't have anything together. And you're going to play January 13th, like John said, at the height of the pandemic? It seems preposterous.
The fact that they brought in
the teams do have a schedule. All the teams have been given a
they have a mock schedule, but the point is that you're right. Now we don't know who's going to say, well, what about this? What about that? We're still trying to figure out the divisions. Maybe they have to scrap the Canadian division now. And if they do scrap it, they're not just going to go back. You're probably not going to want Buffalo with Tampa and Florida for this season. So there's still a lot of stuff they have to figure out here in a short period of time.
Yeah, and the fact that, you know, they've employed, I mean, that's not the right word, they've engaged with Dr. Fauci says to me, I mean, look, he's obviously this high profile guy that, you know, I mean, he's more than high profile. He's everything right now. Says to me, though, that they're erring on the side of conservative caution. It does, because he's not going to give you it'll be okay. He's not gonna. He's telling, you know, the commissioner, as Mike said, and Shanny said, this is when it's at its worst. And look, by the way, this is exactly what they predicted. Hello. If anybody thinks different, I mean, you know, we're sitting here in Boston, and this is exactly what we heard from our governor, from the mayor. Like, we got 60 days of crap coming. I mean, hard stuff coming up. And if the NHL wants to start saying, well, we'll be different, we'll be okay, well, we're going to go buy our own vaccines and everything, it also doesn't look great. And it's also a huge issue. I can't, Bobby, I can't see them playing before Feb 1. I just can't until then.
I've sat here for the last 5-6 minutes and listened to you guys wax eloquently on the various things that are going on. I don't disagree with a lot of what you've said. But in my mind, it comes down to one answer and one answer only, and that is, this doesn't make sense. If you have to, you're jumping through hoops now. You have almost nothing resolved. We have 5, 6, 7 major questions that have not been answered, and here we are the week before Christmas. You're not going to play in the middle of January. If you start in the middle of February, the situation in North America is going to be just as bad as it was in January. Then you got to finish, for television reasons of all things, by the middle of what, July? Mm-hmm. So June or July, is it? July, yeah. Here's the answer, guys. Shut it down. Let's look at September of next year, and you lose a year. They don't want to do it, and it's almost entirely economic reasons why they don't want to do it.
Yep.
You can talk about safety and player safety, fan safety, all the other things. You're gonna pay lip service to the pandemic, but at the end of the day, it's about the dollars in their pockets, and that's the reason that all of this stuff is going on. Shut it down. It's not the end of the world. Hell, they've shut down entire seasons before, and we know why. Mm-hmm. Money. So you're worried about money. You're worried about all these other things too. Do the right thing. And I think the right thing is, forget it. Start up again in September, October.
Well, I think they're going to look at, you know, we've seen the Finnish league go on, what was it, a 3-week pause, I believe, recently.
Yeah, it's supposed to be ending this weekend, but I think they're going to put on another pause.
So, I mean, I think guys, I think they're going to also look at these other leagues, how they impacted, even though they don't look at themselves on equal level. You know, they're the NHL, they're up here, but I think they're going to have, they have these things to look at. Look, if basketball, well, not if, basketball has started exhibition games, right? Preseason games this week. If basketball has something big happen in the next 2 weeks, you better believe the NHL is going to look at that experiment and say, hold on a sec. Because while we all agree that football and baseball were able, we think, well, baseball pulled it off. Football, we think they will. But this is different now. Basketball's indoor. It's this time of year. The pandemic's at a different time than it was with baseball and with football, etc. And so if basketball, Bob, starts rising up, better watch out. The NHL is going to use that. And don't forget that Commissioner Bettman regularly said there was some benefit to them going back to the bubble situation, taking their time to get where they wanted to be eventually, because we learned a lot from all these other sports. So let's not look past the fact that they might, and they're not dragging their feet intentionally, but trust me, they've got an eye on this basketball situation to see if holy smokes it goes south.
And there's no question that they have tried to explore every option. I mean, it's not a case of being caught out. They've been talking to the federal government in our country. They've been talking to, I mean, they certainly have dealt heavily with Ontario, Alberta, and British Columbia over the last 6 months.
That's what they have.
That's right. That's right. No, I'm
we're not going to pat them on the back for doing what they should be doing. They're doing what they should be doing.
I'm stating the case for the fact that they're trying to explore every nook and cranny to find a way to play safely. And
Yeah.
That's the key. That's
my point is, I don't think they can. And I think they have too many problems right now. And now they should be throwing in the towel and saying, you know what? It's not the end of the world. If we have to extend all these contracts by another year, we'll figure it all out then. We're going to play when it's safe. Look,
I think they're going to try to do the 48, like you said. I think that 48 games early
February. Of course they are.
And if they can't, that's going to be it. They are going to shut it down, because I think there's a large number of these owners who would prefer not to play rather than open their doors to no fans.
You are right, guys. Okay, sorry, I was going to say last one to you.
Just a question, like between you and Shanny and Nima, what do you think the percentage of owners that are in the middle or towards the negative of wanting to play is? What do you think? I mean,
I'm going to guess 25% don't want to play and 75% probably lean towards playing. I mean, there's going to be some that are in the middle, but I think there's a solid 6, 7, 8 owners that have said, I don't want to play.
Okay.
John, you know better than I probably.
I don't disagree.
There was a board meeting, I think December 9th or 10th. And prior to the board meeting, I believe that there was 8 or 9 owners that said, you know what, I'm losing less money if I don't play than if I do under this scenario. But they came out of the board meeting really unified, because a lot of and that included some really high profile guys that didn't want to play. And so I think that everybody's very, very positive about going forward, but everything in the last 2 weeks has changed since the 9th and 10th, because of what's gone on with the pandemic and the amount of cases that have grown. And we're now at record numbers in both countries at a certain point. And I think that there might be a reset again before they get approvals from both the players' side and the owner's side to go forward with anything in January or February.
Well, we covered a lot of ground here. I don't know what we accomplished, but
Billy was very likable. Billy was as likable as I've ever seen him.
One of my great qualities.
Billy was very likable. Harrington was charming as always, and you are you. We must off. We thank both of you, obviously, and we wish you a happy holiday season. I assume we won't talk before the festivities, such as they are in this pandemic, but happy holidays to both of you, and thanks a lot for stopping by. See you guys.
Great,
you, Bob.
great to be on. Yeah, thanks for having, Bob. Great to see you guys. Shanny, I got a new puppy. I was going to name it Shanny, but just like you, I knew it wouldn't listen to me, so I named it something else, okay?
What?
Touche. That's the podcast for a Friday. Have a nice weekend. We'll see you on Monday.